Hello, hello. The year has ended, so it's time for year-end lists. I'm gonna start with albums. This was a pretty strange year for listening to music, like last year. Another year where I really didn't listen to much music at all. No commute, no big travel, a lot of the opportunities normally where I have the time to just sit down and put on an album. Instead, I was just like at home and I had other stuff to do. And for the first time ever, I found myself like really disconnected from the super critically acclaimed music that when I was looking at other publications' top lists, there was lots of albums that I had never listened to, sometimes never had even heard of. Lots of other albums that I didn't really give much attention to when they came out. And then later I see all this praise for it, and I'm like, what's up? Am I falling off? I used to take such pride in the fact that I was, kind of with it, that I was aware of all the major releases, that I had some sense of the pulse of music in the most popular cutting edge genres and stuff. But when I thought about it, that feeling of mastery, of expertise, or whatever, sure, that was a point of pride when I was younger. But what really matters is the ability for new music, for things you haven't heard before, to elicit a strong emotional reaction in you. To be able to put on an album you've never heard before and be blown away, and to know immediately that it'll be a classic for you for years to come. That's the important feeling. And whether that comes from 10 albums you hear out of maybe like 30, or 50 albums you hear out of like 500. I used to make like top 50 lists and stuff because, I had the time to really devote myself to all these albums. But the scale doesn't matter. The important thing is reliably being able to get that feeling when you dig into new music. So here are a ton of albums that inspired some sort of strong response from me in 2021. We're starting with this. Sound Ancestors by Madlib, working with Fortet. This album cover I think is pretty cool. This, I'm pretty sure, is one of the patterns you can get if you leave something like salt on a flat surface that's supported over a speaker, and as the bass reverberates and shakes the paper on top, the particles on it will inevitably form these really cool patterns. So Madlib, of course, an extremely prolific artist, has done all sorts of excellent projects over the last 2 decades, producing for rappers, probably his most famous forays, his collabs with other producers, like the legendary Jay Dilla collab, J-Lib, his plentiful beat tapes that he just kind of throws out there for fun, whatever the heck Lord Quaz, his solo rap project is. Of all of those, this might be like the purest. This might be the truest representation of his goals as an artist. So Madlib is famous for his crate digging abilities. And if you haven't heard this term, this is the joyous art of sampling obscure records and weaving them into the freshest new beats. And it comes from, going to record stores where they have those big milk crates full of old records, and digging through them, looking for things that seem interesting, looking for things you haven't heard before, going back and listening to them, not just to enjoy the music, but to get those cuts, to find that bass line that nobody else has ever sampled, to find that little melodious vocal hook that would be perfect to have someone rap over. This time, though, he's digging deeper and broader than ever before, going not just into the genres that made hip-hop, but the genres that made the genres that made hip-hop. And this, of course, is reflected in the title of Sound Ancestors, that he's climbing all the way back up, or all the way down, I guess, the family tree, to see just the roots and the most fundamental, primordial sense of what he does as an artist. And yeah, there's this almost sacred kind of primordial feel to it, that you're seeing and hearing things that formed the roots of everything you love. And it has this really great like improvisational feel. There's very few normally structured tracks on the album. The thing it almost reminds me the most of is Yamanaka Ai, the guy who was in Boredoms and Hantarashi, a Japanese experimental artist, released this one album as a solo DJ called DJ Pika Pika Pika's Natural Love Planetary Gas Weapon 19999, I think is what it's called. It's a crazy, crazy album. And the actual music on it is not at all similar to Sound Ancestors, but this like free spirited improvisational feel where like some tracks bleed into other ones. There's sometimes beats that go on for a whole suite of songs. Other times there's just these like flash in the pan experiments. Just this totally free-form celebration of sound itself carries over. But then I think this is so cool when Madlib starts with these really primordial sounds, these really free, natural sounds, and then draws a line by growing the track and evolving it into something that sounds like really modern, that sounds like, a song you would hear on another Madlib project, kind of showing how his music grew in the first place. Ooh, that's cool. That's so cool. But it isn't just like, hushed reverence for these sound ancestors. There's no sense of like, we're going into the origins of hip hop, so we need to tread lightly. There's this really lovely sense of joking around. And it reminds us that music has always been about fun, about community, about playing off of each other. It reminds me of an article I read a little while ago about, I'm not going to remember any of the place names or details, but an anthropologist was studying these ancient hunting cultures that still carry forward with the most ancient hunting traditions and such, and they would have various rituals they would do to bless the hunt and to try to ensure its success. And for the most part, these were taken very seriously, and they would go through all the motions properly. But the anthropologist noticed that after like some unsuccessful hunts, or if there's like crappy weather or whatever, that sometimes they would do the rituals like almost sarcastically, joking around a lot, really not taking it seriously at all. And the anthropologist was kind of surprised, like, don't you think this will offend your gods, the ancestors, the people you're trying to call on to help you out here? And they were like, oh no, those entities, they have a sense of humor about this too. and it, it's surprising how often we forget this idea that if we really revere someone, that reverence doesn't necessarily mean that they have a reverence for themselves that's so self-serious. It means that there's someone that we really identify with, that we can connect to, that we can have fun with, that we can bond with on the level that we bond with our friends. This album was like co-produced by Four Tet. I don't know what he did exactly, but I really feel his influence. There's this really warm, whimsical feeling. It's sometimes a bit haunting too. That there's kind of a distance, a gravity to some stuff that I always associate with Four Tet's music. So I think that's kind of his influence. My recommended tracks, Road of the Lonely Ones is a pretty traditional kind of Madlib project. It's very sample driven from a song that I looked this up. It's by a group called The Exiles. It's like really haunting, has like a great gravitas, and he just, as he does, very expertly builds an entire song around it. And then this song Hop Rock, I think, is a great example of drawing a line from a very strange improvisity space with these really primordial sounds to kind of like a full-fleshed modern beat, which is super cool. It has, some of the more experimental samples. There's a long segment in the middle of it that's just like listening to an answering machine. Kind of reminds me of Dean Blunt. But it's, I don't know, I think it's a good example of like the kind of thing he was going for on this project. Okay. Moving on, we now have Mirror Guide by Giant Claw. So Giant Claw I've been listening to for quite a while, but never like super devoutly. I kind of saw them as a bit of a novelty, like a great novelty, but like, an artist very within a niche. And that's because the first project I heard from Giant Claw was Deep Thoughts, which is like super MIDI core. It was made entirely with like default samples on like a MIDI keyboard, so it has this like kind of like weird, cheesy, super like amateurish feel. But then of course he builds these really awesome, catchy, complex compositions with them. So it's like super good, and it's a fantastic album, but it's definitely something that feels a little like gimmicky, right? And then whenever I heard other Giant Claw stuff, I always kind of contextualized it with like, okay, like what is like the trick that they're trying to do on this one? What is the the gimmick? What is and it's kind of like a restricted way to think about an artist. This made me probably maybe more dismissive than I should have been. That I was kind of thinking more about like the novelty than just the quality of the music. And it wasn't until I had recommended a friend Giant Claw, and he got like super super into them, and then like kind of came back to me, and was like, "Oh man, did you like listen to this song? Like, isn't this so cool? Mirror Guide is like fantastic. That's like one of my favorite albums this year." And that really started to make me reconsider and reevaluate it in a new light. And I don't know. I think that's like really cool, right? This sort of peer to peer discussion, the feeling of me recommending something that I just kind of thought lined up with his tastes, and then him appreciating it so much and like reporting back to me all these awesome things he had discovered in this music. And then I kind of going back and reappreciating it and being like, whoa, yeah, this is actually like way more genius than I thought. This era of Spotify algorithm driven just line up to the trough and the music will pour into your brain. No, 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 no. It could never. I hope I don't go on too much of like a boomer rant here, but this sort of like person to person connection through music is really important to me. You know, that's why I want to make videos like this, because talking about music is great. I think here we see a new dimension of experimental electronica brilliance being carved out. Not a novelty or a gimmick. Not just, the surprise of what someone can do with like the default settings on a MIDI keyboard, but showing that there's this huge space with deep and rich potential to this sort of composition. Aiming for the heights of compositional genius, we love an Aphex Twin, Venetian snares, Oneohtrix Point Never, but entirely from this weird slant angle that's unique to Giant Claw. This album has so many cool stuff. I think some highlights are there's a lot of really cool electroacoustics that he samples electric guitars, string instruments. There's a very common motif of like a plucked string that starts kind of like at a natural cadence as if someone is actually plucking it, and then is accelerated without like losing that natural resonance and reverberation to something in the realm of like electronica, into that kind of hyper fast stutter, and stuttery rhythms throughout I think are really really well implemented and something of a musical sweet spot for me. The vocals on this thing are completely unique and really fascinating. They fall into this like really alien uncanny valley the way that they're mastered and produced, but they're not unfriendly either. They're not like intimidatingly alien. Instead, it just kind of feels like someone approaching you from an emotional angle you've never been approached from before, but you're open to it. I think the thing it reminds me of most, and this is still like an experience that stuck with me a lot, was the first time I heard Aphex Twin's Mini Pops, the vocal sample on that. Just how inscrutable it is emotionally, like the emotion being conveyed by the vocals, and then also the emotion that it's supposed to elicit in you. Just things that occupy that extremely ambiguous space, really playing with our understanding of like what human is so fascinating to me. The melodies, this is kind of Aphex 22, that you kind of start with this noodling. Giant Claw is like very scale defying though. It's often very full of accidentals and wandering off your 12 tone and such. And then this feeling of like inner evolution of new ideas that starting from this place of experimentation You then see ideas like bloom and flourish throughout the album. Really, really good stuff. Yeah, I really like electronic artists that, even though, of course, everything is pre programmed into some computer or synthesizer, you still have a sense of like session, of performance, of people that are like, you imagine the different synthesizers being in like a studio together, like riffing and improvising and playing off of one another. Again, it's not what's happening, but things that give you that sensation, I think, are really fun. My recommended tracks are Miracam Online. This is an early one that really, really highlights this like stuttering sound that I find so addictive. And Discworld, which features vocals by this person Nitsky. I don't know how to say that out loud. And Tieski. And that's what I was talking about with these like really uncanny vocals. So it's a good highlight of that. Okay. Moving on to number 7, we have Baby Keem's The Melodic Blue. This is my obligatory rap album that I got really addicted to for the year. I was listening to this constantly for a while after it came out. Songs from it will still get caught in my head out of absolutely nowhere. I still revisit it when I just need, an hour's worth of bangers to for whatever. I would listen to it like running on the treadmill a lot, things like that. Baby Keem exists in this very weird locus of forces within the rap metagame and styles that he's inherited and built on his own. He's very proudly the protege of Kendrick. He's like Kendrick's younger cousin, I believe. Or is that like a joke or a rumor? They got a song called Family Ties. Is that a joke? I don't know. But he emulates Kendrick's style, which I always thought was like very paradoxical. It feels like it should be impossible, of like the natural tryhard that Kendrick is always like very lyrically dense and always like very thematically tight, and his vocabulary is huge and he's like very technical, but it never feels like he's one of those like try hard backpacker rappers. It kind of just feels like this is how he naturally would rap under any circumstances without having to prove anything. So Baby Keem, I think, does a really good job emulating and inheriting that style. And then, of course, he actually has Kendrick on this album. There's 2 Kendrick features, which are super rare these days. But they're so much fun. Like, Kendrick doesn't come on and moralize. He doesn't come on to try to, like, define himself in this modern era. He doesn't come on to stir up hype for some potential album that's probably, like, years away still. He just has fun. He shows up to have fun and to enjoy rapping with his cousin ? It really has the same feel as Jay Electronica's album last year, which had a ton of songs with Jay-Z on it, where Jay-Z like wasn't Jay-Z. He wasn't rapping about Jay-Z type stuff. He wasn't trying to be like, yeah, I'm like the billionaire rapper. You've heard of me before. But he was just spitting verses and reminding us, why he got famous in the first place. It's such a rare treat to hear such famous, such skilled rappers just let loose like this. And of course Kendrick has like the most mimetic album or moment on the entire album at the end of Range Brothers, which really shows like he doesn't take himself that seriously, even though he's probably taken more seriously than any other rapper in terms of like music criticism and stuff. Kendrick himself is here to have fun. The lyrics are like relentlessly clever, so many funny little jokes and puns and stuff, but he never loses his sense of flow. There's never a sense that he's overemphasizing things to make sure you caught his little joke, which always annoys me about rappers. His flow is so cool. Even he dives into this style of rapping that I think is getting more and more popular. Which I think traces its lineage back to E40 of all people. The Bay Area still reigns supreme, where they go into this like very precisely enunciated like non-flow of like just kind of like rapidly speaking. And Kendrick does it too on this album, and they just nail it, and it's so much fun. There are the like super memey moments. Range Brothers, as I mentioned, was like one of the music memes of the year. And it's just fun. It's like extra funnies. This album definitely doesn't dive too far into the inner psyche of Baby Keem. The emotional mode is like pretty core. There is, of course, some detours into, the pressures of coming up as a rapper, the traumas of his youth, his ambitions, and then his limitations, and struggling to break through those limitations. But I would say that's all still pretty core, and it never really detracts from like the flow and presence of the music, and the fact that like literally every track is just a banger. And it's interesting because the album title of The Melodic Blue to me really suggests some like deep contemplative emotional place. And there is a track where this woman is saying like, "Tell me about it, take me there, the melodic blue." And it's it like resonates and stuff, but like it's kind of a weakness, I think, that he doesn't really go into his feelings as much as say Kendrick does. But on the other hand, the whole album just straight slaps, which is great and means that I can listen to it over and over again in almost any circumstance. So I kind of appreciate that he stuck to like the core that he's very, very strong in and didn't like experiment too much. He has room to do that later. He does sample Serpent with Feet, who is this experimental like R&B artist. He samples an early Serpent with Feet track too, back when Serpent with Feet made like really depressing, really bleak, noisy, haunting music, which is the era that I really love of Serpent with Feet. Now he's too happy. His new album, spoiler alert, did not make this list because it's too happy. It's not that interesting anymore. But he samples an early Serpent with Feet track called The Four Ethers. And I'm like, ooh, okay, this is showing a lot of promise. This shows someone that in future albums could get like really experimental with it and has the talent to back it up. So I'm really happy that he's kind of like establishing himself, he's practicing, he's forming these connections, and then something amazing could come. My recommended tracks, Range Brothers, obligatory, one of the most fun songs this entire year. I just always think of the tweet Baby Keem made before it came out and said, "I just want to go back to the year 1600 and play some peasants Range Brothers." Just like imagining that. I don't know. It's so good. It's just listen to it. And then Lost Souls is a more serious song. I think it really highlights the fact that he can talk about some serious issues and express himself without it detracting from the fact that it's also just a very catchy banger type song. It has a cool outro too, showing some kind of cinematic dynamicism, which is something I always appreciate in rappers. Oh man, we gotta get going. It's 22 minutes in, and we're only on album number 4. Yeah, this is the 4th one we're talking about. And number 7, Young Thug's Punk. When I was listening to this, it made me appreciate that I've been listening to Young Thug for almost a decade now. I think I got into him in 2013. And his rise to fame happened in 2012. So it really is like a decade of Thugger being this presence in hip hop. And on this, one of his biggest and most ambitious projects, the whole of that history is backing him up. The roster of producers and guest stars is like legendary. It's nostalgic. It's surprising. He collabs with Nate Ruess on one song, who's the lead singer of that band Fun. What's that Fun song everybody knows? When I was making these slides, I had it like stuck in my head, and now it's just totally gone, and I can't even think of what it's called. But there's a Fun song you'll recognize because it got really popular. So he just gets this kind of like mainstream pop rock artist for some reason. And it's touching too. Mac Miller and Juice WRLD feature on prominently on a track each, and I don't know, it's a touching tribute. R.I.P. to them. Of course, too, like if you're featuring posthumous verses and stuff on your album, you got to wonder how long were these songs in development. And the release of Young Thug's music has always been a shit show with leaking and sample clearing issues and re-recording old tracks and songs getting canceled, songs getting pushed from album to album, albums getting delayed, albums getting scrapped and turned into 3 or 4 other albums. So this isn't just like a retrospective. These might actually be slices of an unheard past, which is cool. You know, you get to hear rappers from different eras that you'd never hear them coming back like this. But this is more than just Thugger back at it again with a whole bunch of bangers in a row. Although it is that too. Young Thug I always thought was the great inverter of hip hop. That everything that I usually found lame in other rappers, like singing ballads, super sentimental slow jams, things that I'd skip, things that kind of drag down an album that I want to go to for like a fun time full of bangers. Young Thug makes all those things so compelling, so unique. He changes them from lowlights to highlights. And on Punk, there's more conventional sins, things that I would normally skip, that are my highlights of the album. Playing with a live band, the fact that he has more little spoken word segments than ever, these thematically written songs that really only he and rappers from the 90s like A Tribe Called Quest can make sound not corny. Punk, I would say, represents another crystal shattering point. Zach Fox, famous Twitter comedian come rapper, said that he saw Young Thug as this point of like of crystallization and shattering in hip hop, where suddenly a huge space of possibilities were opened up by this one artist. And Young Thug has done this several times, like the original 1017 Thug, Barter 6, Family Don't Matter off of what's that album called? Beautiful Thugger Girls. On Punk, I think it explodes again, and whole careers can be born from the space that he opened up in hip hop here. My recommended tracks are Stupid / Asking. This is like a really cool longer song. Each half of it is awesome, and then there's this really moving, powerful transition between the two. Each one of them is like super catchy and just kind of speaks to Young Thug's just innate, undeniable ability to write catchy hooks. And Contagious, where he very sorrowfully sings, I wish keeping it real really was contagious. Again, something that would be so corny if it came out of any other rapper's mouth over this kind of murmuring guitar ballad that, again, most of the time if I saw that on paper I'd be like, no, 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 no. But because it's Young Thug, yes, yes, yes. Absolutely love both these songs. But I think if you want to get a sample of this album, there's a concert he did. Wait, how do I... Okay, I don't know how to find it. I can't remember who it was with, so I got... Oh, it was a Tiny Desk concert. I thought it was a Tiny Desk concert, but they didn't play it in the normal Tiny Desk studio, so I got confused. But he has a concert through NPR's Tiny Desk series, where he's out in like a garden, playing with a live band, playing a bunch of tracks from Thug, or Punk, sorry, playing a bunch of Punk tracks, and it's fantastic, and I think that's a great way to be introduced to the album. Okay. Moving on to number 6, I think? Yeah. Lingua Ignota's Sinner, Get Ready. So 2 years ago, her previous album Caligula came out. I kind of gurgled through that sentence. It really became a staple of my musical diet, something that I return to because it provides something wholly unique for me. This righteous fury, the sacrifice of the profane and the self, sacrifice being made sacred through your suffering and through giving up something, this huge yet intimate scope. It's something very, very special for me. It's really become more and more favorite among mine. So my expectations for this were terrifying. If it was able to have the same power over me, I approached it very humbly and very afraid that this might destroy me psychologically. But here it's different. Much has been drawn towards her. It's colder, it's darker, it's more within herself. At first this was like a little bit disappointing. The original album provided so much catharsis for me that I could sing along to it, that I could yell along to it if necessary, and release something really deep from within myself. But here, in this more contemplated mode, I didn't find that same release. But what we trade for that is all the more affecting. And it starts with the very fact that this catharsis that I was seeking, that was like not really there to begin with. Like I wasn't actually resolving anything by singing along to this. I wasn't actually undoing her pain or bringing about a change that would prevent the suffering in the future or anything like that. It was an illusionary sense of empowerment. And I think this album really like challenges you to consider that. Like, what sort of enjoyment are you getting out of hearing this? And is it the actual change that you might be like tricked into thinking is being brought about? The tonal space is opened way wider on this one. There's tracks. The first one, almost every track at some point would just kind of obliterate itself into noise or blow up into some grand operatic scale. But here, everything is more kind of contented in its position. There's tracks that say sincerely beautiful for the duration. The image I have in mind is the tenderness of a small smoldering ash. There's haunting, mysterious samples, very reminiscent of Godspeed You Black Emperor. This is a territory fairly new to her that I really hope she keeps exploring, because the contrast of these really emotionally devastating tracks and then these mysterious lo-fi samples kind of statically shuddering in the background. There's one on the opening track where a man talks about the depth of silence, how in total silence you could hear your deceased mother singing a hymn in church. That really haunted me. And yet, from the space of beauty, because this album is very beautiful in a lot of ways, beautiful singing, beautiful piano playing and instrumentation, you still feel all of her weight, all of the tragedy that she carries. And so pretty recently, maybe a month or so ago, on Twitter, she shared stories of abuse at the hands of the lead singer of Daughters. And it was really, really painful to read that stuff. It was a horrible, horrible situation perpetrated by a really horrible person. And looking back at her music and hearing it again, knowing that she had gone through all of this, that, you know, she's not just kind of fighting the archetypal injustice of the world, but instead, or not instead, but along with it, fighting through a very, very personal pain. It just gives the whole thing another dimension that really will make it, I think, an all-time album of note. So my recommended tracks are the opener, The Order of Spiritual Virgins. This one is probably most similar to a track from Caligula. It's like a big kind of suite with huge cathartic sing-along type moments, other moments of deep rumbling noise, an excellent sense of just like build up and payoff. And at the end, it has that sample I was talking about the man discussing silence, total dead silence. It's phenomenal. And then a later track on the album, Perpetual Flame of Centralia. Centralia is a town somewhere in the Midwest, I think, where there was a fire in a mine, and the fire is still just burning underneath forever. Well, not forever, but for thousands of years probably. And she really brings forth this image of just this underground smoldering fire on this track that is really just kind of a piano ballad throughout most of it, singing about how she's washed in the blood of Jesus. Phenomenal. Okay. Moving along to the halfway point, we have Richard Dawson and Circle collaborating on the album Henki. So when I heard there was a new Richard Dawson project, I got really, really excited. But unfortunately, this isn't the third part in the Peasant/2020 cycle. So he made an album called Peasant, which was set in like the 1400s. and it just has slice of life stories of the peasantry of England around that time and all the miserable things they have to go through. And then he made an album called 2020, which is set in basically the same location, but in present day, and it talks about all the miserable things people are still going through, and it's fantastic. As a pair, they're just phenomenal. Some of my favorite albums. And I was really hoping, I've expressed this hope to a few people, and there's some skepticism that he was gonna make an album set in like the far future. And it would be full of like, you know, the miserable things people deal with in the world of 2500 or something. But no, that probably will never happen because I think it's inherently very silly. And this isn't it, yeah. But it's still really colossally fantastic. I absolutely love this album. All the qualities that we love from Richard Dawson are here in full effect. If you don't know Richard Dawson, here's my brief rundown of the qualities I like in him. He tells stories through his lyrics with deeply evocative sparks of character and setting. And here, there's a wider variety, I think, than ever. Most of his music is themed in some sense, all of his albums. Before this little dyad that I talked about, he had an album that was all about, like, horrific things he'd read in the news. Right? I think that's what that's about. So here's one of his first projects where he was totally unfettered by theme and could just write stories about anything that interests him. I think the only small theming is that all of them have something to do with some sort of plant. I saw a lot of places talk about how this is like a botanical album. It's not really that important, but you know, that's kind of an Easter egg, I guess. And yet, even though there is this variety, there seems to be some lesson that is elusive, but it persists in the back of your mind between tracks. Most of the stories have some sort of moral to them. Some sort of sense that the character is receiving some sort of karmic punishment or reward for their life up until that point. And it's very compelling to try to like draw lines and arcs throughout what this is saying. His miraculously intricate lines brought forth with his signature blend of bellowing baritone and sweet falsetto. Nobody else sings like him. Nobody in the world. I love his voice so much. So what does they're Finnish, I think? Or Swedish? There's somewhere in Scandinavia, there's this band called Circle, which I hadn't heard of before, that are kind of like a hard rock metal band that he teamed up with. And it really makes this album just rock out super hard now. Before his music, Richard Dawson's was more folksy, more of kind of like a trade-off maybe between folksy elements and noisy elements. And now it's just like really driving rock music, and it kicks ass. This sort of like riff build up and big climactic riff structure, I really associate that with just like rock music through the ages. And honestly, I'm not that interested in it very much. Like, I had a Led Zeppelin phase when I was a kid. I will still rock out to dad rock on occasion, but like, it's not what I'm looking for in new music. It's not, you know, something that I'm going to be like, whoa, this is I need to really sit down and think about why this is so good. I think the difference is these tracks are generally very long. And the subject matter is so complex and so like, you know, the lyrics are complex. The subject matter is like obscure. The stories being told are like very intricate and rely on like a very deep characterization. So if you have this normal formula of just rocking out on the guitars, but spaced out and with that hugeness and gravity, the anticipation and payoff is all the more powerful. Oh, I probably leave it up here. And with this and the lingua ignota, the sampling she was using, and kind of her willingness to just let a space breathe, I think what's happening is I'm having another post-rock phase. I'm just rediscovering my love for post-rock through these albums. Anyways, my recommended tracks are Cooksonia, the opener, which is about an Australian botanist from like the 1930s. It just kind of gives like a summary of her life, and then taps into, okay, given the biographical record of this person, what was she yearning for? What were her secret desires? How did she see the world? Which is, that's Richard's bread and butter, is diving into that sort of thing. And Silphium, which is a couple tracks later, this one just absolutely kicks ass. The piano melody on it, whenever that comes in, whew, and it has this wonderful long breakdown in the middle that the whole time you're just like giddy with anticipation for when everything kicks back in. Just excellent rock music songwriting. Okay, moving on to number 4. Just showing that yes, indeed, my post-rock phase has begun again. The OGs, God's Fiji Black Emperor, with their latest album, God's Pee at State's End. That's right, my post-rock era has restarted, and there's no better time to be listening to something like God's Fiji Black Emperor. I was a huge fan of GYBE and a Silver Mount Zion, which is like the side band that a lot of the same members are involved in. In my early teens, I saw them live whenever I could because they're just based out of Montreal. They toured Toronto. I think I saw them 3 times. I saw Silver Mount Zion twice and God's Fiji Black Emperor once, and they were just awe-inspiring shows. Like, nothing is like seeing this band live. I'll tell you what it's like, though. Because if you look it up, and if you have no idea what this is and you look it up, you're going to be disappointed. They have a projector, and it's just playing shots of, like, trains, or, like, nothing, or, like, just kind of, like, static. And then they sit in a circle, and they're playing their instruments, and they don't make any contact with the audience at all. They just play away. But it's just such mind-bogglingly beautiful music. So sad, but so powerful that you're just sitting there, like, weeping at this, like, circle of people ignoring you. Anyways, so at the time, in my early teens, I really believed in the message of their music, that there was this inevitable anarcho-apocalyptic future that they were evoking, that they were challenging us to imagine. And now it's here. So I wanted to put some examples in the slide, but I realized by the time I recorded it, the examples I put in the slide were probably irrelevant. The timely stories will all be different. But there's examples every day of just the apocalypse we're living through. Well, what are the most recent ones I heard? Children are getting diabetes at an alarming rate because of COVID. That if you catch COVID as a child, you're like 2.5 times more likely to get type 2 diabetes. But then I also saw some tweets that were like, that study is bogus. It was very poorly done. So we're both being told horrible news, but then of course we're being reminded that we don't know anything, and all of these things are almost impossible to independently verify. So we can just live in like a perpetual state of fear. The traffic jam on the I-95, where people were stuck in their cars for like 18 hours. That one felt very Godspeed You-ish. I could imagine some of those cars were on fire with no driver at the wheel, and the streets are running red, etc., etc. That's the opening monologue from another Godspeed You Black Emperor album. Cryptoland. I've been following Cryptoland a lot. It feels like scams are hitting a singularity point where you can literally just charge any amount of money for anything and someone will buy it. Demand has become wholly disconnected from supply because we have huge demand for things with like a totally artificial supply, and then we also have major supply issues where things are being overproduced. I was reading about a spot in this desert where they just dump tons, literally gigatons of unsold clothes, and at the same time you go to the supermarket and there's tons of food sold out. I could go on for days. The world is ending. It never occurred to me to remark on the fact that, like, oh, hey, I used to have this, like, apocalyptic phase in my early teens where I was sure that I would live to see the world ending, and now I am seeing the world ending. And I think there's just a disconnect because it's so much stupider than I expected. Actually, seeing the end of the world, it's so much more based on like human error and human selfishness than I would have expected. I wanted some sort of like grandness, some sense of heroicness, some hugeness to it, not just this weird death by a thousand cuts. And it was here. By returning to this music, I'm starting to get in touch with this recontextualization that I can really see this for what it is, that the end of the world is awe-inspiring. So the music is just what you'd expect, which might be just what you want or just what you need. Huge, driving, beautiful, weep-inducing melodies of guitar and strings and drum and drone. Just the bread and butter of post-rock music. This wonderful mix of everyone just sort of like noodling on their instruments, but then moving together too. Like, even though it's hard to imagine sheet music or rehearsals for a band such as this, their ability to synchronize and push together into the climaxes of these melodies, it's as if they're possessed. These climactic journeys are spaced out in a sea of minimal drifting noise. It's very haunting, very uncanny. You can't really connect to it. You can't really grasp any sort of melody or significance. But there's some warmth to it too. It's very hard to describe. The warmth of noise. Everything is punctuated by their signature sampling of things like shortwave radio and street preachers. This album a little lighter than most on the sampling, but what's there makes an impression. And for the message of the album, I think what we should do is just read the release statement they made. Even though this video is already really long. You knew what you were signing up for. They always put out like a statement with their albums, and they're always very moving. All right. We wrote it on the road mostly, when that was still a place, and then recorded it in masks later, distanced at the beginning of the second wave. It was autumn, and the failing sun was impossibly fat and orange. We tried to summon a brighter reckoning there, bent beneath varied states of discomfort, worry, and wonderment. We fired up the shortwave radios again, for the first time in a long time, and found that many things had changed. The apocalypse pastors were still there, but yelling, "End times now," where once they yelled, "End times soon." And the transmission detritus of automated militaries takes up more bandwidth now, so that a lot of frequencies are just pulses of rising white static, digital codexes announcing the status of various watching and killing machines. And the ham radio dads talk to each other all night long about their dying wives and what they ate for lunch and what they'll do with their guns when Antifa comes. This record is all about us waiting for the end. All current forms of governance are failed. This record is about all of us waiting for the beginning and is informed by the following demands. Empty the prisons, take power from the police and give it to the neighborhoods that they terrorize, end the forever wars and all other forms of imperialism, tax the rich until they're impoverished. Much love to all the other lost and lovely ones. These are death times and our side has to win. We'll see you on the road once the numbers fall. It's good. So I wouldn't say this is like an addictive banger type album. I probably listen to The Melodic Blue 50 times as much as I listen to this. But in these trying times, now more than ever, we need to get our ideological heads on straight. We can't just laugh at this stuff. We have to realize that we're witnessing something awe-inspiring and terrible and truly unique among all times. And I think this album can help you give some, can get some perspective on that. Yeah. Oh, excuse me. Moving on to something completely different. This is Black Square. It's probably 5 or 6 albums that came out this year that just used a totally black square for release. You know, it's pretty common. But, of course, we're talking about Donda. Donda. I think I feel like I got to be on the defensive for this one. This is like kind of a weird position for me to be in, to be on like the critical back foot. Most albums that I talk about, that I praise, I'm not the only one praising them. They usually get like good reviews. They're usually, acclaimed music. That's often how I found out about them, right? But with Donda, the public perception has changed on Mr. West, and I find myself in a shrinking and very small group of his persistent defenders, especially, when it comes to the music itself. So yeah, it's almost 2 hours long. It probably doesn't have to be 2 hours long. Yes, yes. He deliberately features various artists of much deserved controversy and worse. Freaking Chris Brown is inexplicably on here still. The Baby is highlighted very much in reference to the fact that he started getting kicked out of festivals for saying a bunch of really dumbass shit about AIDS, which like it's genuinely shocking that someone could be so uneducated about something like that in the year 2021. Friggin' Marilyn Manson was on here while also facing charges for assault. I think those charges were dropped, but Kanye didn't know that at the time. He was deliberately stirring up controversy, and there's really no justifying that. The prolonged release mania around this is getting to the point of self-parody. I'm not going to break down the prolonged, belabored cycle of announcements and delays and shows and listening parties. Yeah. Okay, I wrote this before he started going out with friggin' Julia Fox. The Julia Fox thing, maybe that'll work. Maybe he's okay now. Maybe anyways, he's dating Julia Fox, but before that he was doing all sorts of really strange and embarrassing things with regard to his breakup with Kim. It was worse than I could have imagined. All of this is true. Kanye's not in a good place mentally, and a lot of the choices he made on this album are really inexplicable and unjustifiable. And I'm not saying that the negative reviews are wrong to be negative. And I think the criticism I hear from like Kanye fans that would be willing to overlook all or most of this stuff if they like the album, the reason they don't like the album is there's just a bunch of features, that every track has so many guest rappers and stuff. It's not wrong either. It's just that I like it. The whole thing is just this glorious celebration of a genre that Ye, as much as anyone, has built over his long and celebrated and wonderful career. Like, holy crap, the number of jaw-dropping moments on this album, he has this cinematic capability. I always talk about this with Kanye, because no other rapper does it a fifth as well, of writing and composing with the assumption that the audiences are feeling it like 10,000%, that the audiences are enjoying it as if this was the best music they'd ever heard, and playing off that assumption, playing off those expectations, to deliver this cinematic experience. And I always use the word cinematic because it's as if he thinks you're just watching it in a theater, that it has your undivided attention, and every moment you're just thinking, holy crap, this is the most brilliant thing I've ever heard. This is the power of Kanye's ego. Because he assumes you're in that space, he can deliver you an experience that really is like watching like the best of blockbuster cinema. It draws you into the moment, and then it just like detonates it. On this extended tour of his styles, his eras, and his friends, his opportunities to create these moments have never been more plentiful and varied. It's just simple math. The album is 2 hours long. If we assume some constant rate of Kanye dropping these amazing moments, this album is going to have a lot of moments. and I can't get over, this album has like Baby Keem, it has Young Thug, it has Jadakiss, it has Jay-Z, like it has Jay Electronica. Like the spectrum of rappers that he's drawing from here is just nonsense. Like no one else. Andre 3000 is on the bonus track that came out for like Donda Deluxe or whatever. Like that's crazy. The only one he didn't get was Frank Ocean. There's moments of sheer gospel transubstantiation, But then there's also moments where trap rappers just go like absolutely in. There's moments where he discards any genre conventions of hip hop and provides you with just sheer sonic bliss. It's fantastic. It's just great music. I don't know. No, y'all are crazy. I take it back. All negative reviews unjustified. This is a masterpiece. And, you know, okay, sure. Maybe these moments have been more profound in the past. True. In the past, Kanye really put himself out there with his struggling, with his position in the celebrity world. You know, there was messages. There was depth to it, for sure. Nowadays, it's kind of like, Jesus, great. My mom was great. I sure miss her. And then he kind of leaves it to like the guest rappers to actually say something, you know, meaningful. Because the rest is kind of just like, I'm rich. I'm Kanye. So yeah, the profoundness isn't quite here. But there's so much. There's so much. I could just keep returning to this album over and over again and still find new moments that I'm like, damn, that was well done. You know, saying this, I realize what I've become. You know, there's those dad rock bands that are just still putting out albums. They've made like 40 albums now, and they've like sucked since the 70s, but they just keep putting out albums because there's some people out there that are just addicted to like a particular type of thing they do. And they listen to the new albums, and there it is. It's still there. And they're like, I don't know, say what you will, but it still fucking slaps. I'm becoming that. I'm becoming that for Kanye. It's just how it is, though. It's just how it's gotta be. Okay, my recommended tracks. Hurricane, this is the first single. I think this is just straight up, like, the best executed track. Like, I think if he had just released that single, and walked away, everybody'd be like, damn, you know, Kanye's back on top. Kanye's, I thought he was going crazy, but wow, he can still put out a hit when he needs to. But of course, no, he had to release like another 2 hours of music. Yeah, Hurricane's great. I love it. I listened to it over and over and over again when it came out. I cried a lot listening to it. I don't even know why. It's not a particularly sad song. And Jesus Lord Part 2. Probably a controversial pick because it's like 12 minutes long. A lot of it is just a phone call with Larry Hoover Jr. about how happy he is that Kanye's making an effort to get his dad out of jail. And then the rest of it is just like long ass verses about Jesus. But you know, they do got Jadakiss on here, and they got Jay Electronica on here, and nobody raps about God like Jay Electronica. I don't know, man. I'm not a Christian. I don't particularly need to be inspired on the subject of Jesus, but this song is just so beautiful. I don't know. The beat, the organ, that little sample of someone singing Jesus Lord, the way Kanye integrates the sample as like a call and response thing during the hook. I don't know. I love it. I just love it. All right. Let's move on to the final two. We have this collaboration between Floating Points, Pharoah Sanders, and the London Symphony Orchestra on the album Promises. So on the exact opposite of Donda, this one I've been seeing everywhere, on like every single year-end list, on every site's praiseworthy section, on their top reviewed section. This has got to be one of the most acclaimed albums for sure. On the one hand, not too surprising, the prestige of this 3-part collab would lend itself to an album that people are like, yeah, this is great. Like, Floating Points is this genius electronic composer that's always kind of been on the fringe of the genre. He's released something like 2 albums total in the last 10 years. And I think spends most of his time running a record label and is kind of just working on music on the side. But all of his releases have been like hugely critically acclaimed. He also does production occasionally. He did production for KDB. Do you know the British pop star KDB? He produced a few of her songs and they kick ass. Pharoah Sanders, of course, a saxophone legend, part of the holy trinity of saxophonists. One of the true prodigies. Proteges? Oh my god. A prodigy and a protege of Coltrane. And the London Symphony Orchestra. of course, is the pinnacle of prestige. If you want to have an orchestra, you might as well have the London Symphony Orchestra. It doesn't get much more legit than that. On the other, though, it's kind of surprising that everyone took to this album so much, because it's just like ambient saxophone and strings, like kind of just riffing. Um, there's not a whole lot to it. There's no like lyrical content. There's no, overt message. There's no parts that I would say are particularly like catchy. Although sometimes I'll catch myself like whistling parts of it. Like a 10-second little segment will really lock into me, but it's not like sing-along bangers. So it's kind of surprising that each and every person that approached this from all sorts of backgrounds, all sorts of musical perspectives, was like, whoa, this is something special. And it's because it is something so special. It's really wonderful, really beautiful, really, really unique. I don't know if I'm just out of touch on what jazz is like these days, and this sort of project isn't so, unorthodox, but I haven't heard anything like this before. I really haven't, and it blew me away. Pharoah Sanders' performance is hypnotic. It feels like something really deep within himself is stirring, and that's being translated directly to the mouthpiece of the saxophone. Every breath, every movement, his very soul is in that sound. And the dialogue between him and the other musicians is so multifaceted. So many roles played by each. Is it that one is leading the others on a journey? Or is it that one is kind of flowing in the tide that the others create? Is one interpreting the other? Kind of, crafting a derivative of the sound? Which one is the student? Which one is the teacher? You can ask these questions, and there'll be some perspective that feels right for a minute or two, and then everything kind of shifts imperceptibly. And you suddenly feel like the dynamics at play are totally different. And each time you listen to the album, just depending on your mood, depending on what you're doing, all of those things could change yet again. It's just endlessly engrossing in that way. It's all of the above and more, an endlessly blossoming and flowing sonic experience. No recommended tracks for this one. I should have mentioned also no recommended tracks for the Godspeed You Black Emperor one, because it doesn't really feel appropriate. There's only 4 tracks on the album, and they're all really long. And this one, again, it doesn't really feel appropriate. It's just one long composition with different movements. It's certainly valid to be like, yeah, this is my favorite movement, but like, I wouldn't be like, yo, listen to movement, whatever, it really slaps. Just listen to it. Just listen to the whole thing. Oh yeah, I wanted to say too, this is great video editing. I forgot to mention, for the Godspeed You Black Emperor album, what I would recommend is, if you've never listened to them, go back and listen to F sharp, A sharp, Infinity. I think that's the best entry point to the band. It's really iconic. If you get into the band, you're always going to hear memes about it. I already made a joke about it. It's really, really, really great. And then from there, you can kind of start branching out into their later work. But I think, if you've never, ever heard of them, don't start with this latest one, but start with that. And if you have heard of them, then you don't really need any recommendations. It is what you think it is. Okay, let's talk about At Last, number 1. Oh, guess what? Yeah, you knew it. It's Donda again. It's Donda 2. Donda taking up both the 3rd and 1st place slots on this list. No, just kidding. It may look similar. It may look like another Totally Black square. But you can see this number 2 and the obligatory parental advisory sticker indicate that it's something else. It is Dean Blunt's Black Metal 2. Oh, hello.
Hey, do you want anything from the store?
No, I'm good. I'm gonna be done in like 5 minutes.
Oh, do you want to come?
Yeah, maybe.
Okay.
Okay.
Hi, Keats to you too.
Well, it's Ashley.
Bye, Keats to you too.
Bye. All right, let's talk about Black Metal 2, and then I'll go to the store. How fun. All right. I gotta say, this album at first, a bit disappointing. Where was the abrasiveness? Where was like the hilarious gag harsh noise tracks? Where was the super long ass like 16-minute tracks? Where was the dread? The horrible, horrible, dreadful feeling that he would bring out on tracks like Grade. There's none of that. It felt so simple. It was so accessible. It didn't feel like we were being attacked at all. Like, what's the point of music that doesn't attack you in some way? Of course, I'm being a little facetious here, but, you know, I've followed Dean Blunt's career for quite a while. He makes, like, very strange, elusive music. It's often very abrasive. It's often very inaccessible. And this is the first thing I've ever heard from him that doesn't have any of that, like, bite. So it was a little shocking. It was a little, like, huh, what? But then, as I listened to it more and more, it felt like a gift. And the wondrousness of this gift settled into me. That he looked at black metal, which is one of his most acclaimed and popular albums, and he thought about, like, what is the vital essence of this? What is it that people love about this? And distilled it and extended it to constitute the entirety of this album. Because it deserves it. The core formula of black metal is so powerful, so beautiful. It deserves like 5 albums. It deserves an entire musician's career. It deserves an entire genre to itself of many musicians working in this mode. That's just how good music like this sounds to me. Okay, so what is going on here? What is this wonderful formula that simply by executing it more and more feels like a gift to me? Okay, so it's Dean Blunt. He's got a loop of some like acoustic guitar just playing along with this soft jazzy beat. Sometimes there's more than this, but usually just this much. He sings various lyrics in a very disaffected, depressed mode, but mostly depressing things. He kind of has this character of like, almost like a British gangster. Not really clear. Some person kind of involved in like the scene, but he's like down bad. Things aren't going well for him. That's generally the theme. It's somebody kind of moping around. And then sometimes on maybe about half of the tracks, Joanne Robertson, who just has this beautiful, angelic, resonant voice, comes in and sings, and without looking at the lyrics, you have no idea what she's singing about. Like, you get a sense, you get a sense of the emotional mode for sure. You get a sense of some words, but it's much more about just the sound that she adds to it. And that's it. That's all. That's the entire album. It's perfect. It makes me cry. I listened to this like 200 times. I love it. It kind of feels weird to pick it as album of the year because there's nothing that crazy about it. There's nothing really on here that wasn't also on Black Metal 1. But just the amount that I love it, I couldn't pick anything else. It's just something. My recommended tracks are Dash Snow and La Raza. I don't know. I don't know if I picked these for a particular reason. I don't remember. All of the tracks are great, and they're all pretty similar to each other. So I think, you know, each individual person will find ones that really resonates with them. I also really, really, really like the closing track. I'd say that one is like especially special. But I didn't want to pick that because that's spoilers. Listen to the whole thing, and then you'll get to the rot. Okay, that's it. That's my 10 albums. I'm gonna go grocery shopping and get out of the house for the first time today. I hope you enjoyed. Please check out these albums. Let me know what you think. And let's look forward to hopefully a more normal year. Hopefully a year where I can, you know, be on some trips and stuff and maybe listen to some more music. But even if not, as I said, I'm sure I'll listen to enough music that I love. Because any amount of music is enough music to love, as long as you love it. Okay, bye-bye.